Hi, I'm Brielle, and my sister called me a poor cleaner inside the showroom I built from the ground up. She stood there, in front of clients and cameras, laughing like my sweat had been a phase. But what hurt more than her words was how everyone else stayed quiet. They clapped for her. They handed her credit for my name, my work, my legacy. But I wasn't just erased, I was replaced. What would you do if your own family rewrote your story while smiling in your face? Would you walk away, or would you make them remember exactly who you are? Let me tell you what I did. The morning sunlight cut across the marble floor like a spotlight on a stage I no longer recognized. My name was on the building, engraved in brushed gold above the entrance, but inside, I had become invisible. It was supposed to be a soft launch, quiet, controlled. Just a few industry people, returning clients, and press. I stood by the welcome desk, where I'd once greeted every customer myself, with a fresh espresso in hand and a practiced smile. I didn't expect flowers or applause, just acknowledgement. And then she arrived. Valora swept through the glass doors like she was walking a runway. Designer heels, hair curled to perfection, and that air she always carried, the kind that made people lean in, even if they didn't know why. She hugged the manager, laughed with the valet, and nodded at clients who didn't even know her name a month ago. They know it now, though. She made sure of that. She walked right past me. No pause, no glance. No "Hey sis, good job." Just air. Then, to a man browsing the latest model, she said with a breezy chuckle, "I used to help her clean houses. Now she's here too. Funny how life works, right?" He laughed. I didn't. I felt the heat climb up the back of my neck, but I didn't move. Even the staff, people I had hired and trained, looked away like they weren't sure what to do. I'd become a footnote in my own showroom. I stepped aside, letting the espresso cool in my hand. My feet knew their way to the office, even though I wasn't ready to sit. Just needed a minute. The air felt thinner in there. Kellen found her next. The showroom manager charming, loyal, to her. They'd known each other since Valora hosted pop-up shows in Brentwood. He handed her a glass of champagne and smiled like she was royalty. "She's the face of the brand," he told a small group of press huddled near the display. I wasn't 2 feet away. No one corrected him. A young intern, barely 20, fresh out of some marketing program, handed me a trifold brochure and said, "You can help with client parking today, right?" My lips parted, but I closed them just as fast. I nodded once. She walked off without a second glance. This wasn't confusion. It was intentional. The clients were handed flutes of champagne, personalized printouts, keys to preview models. I was offered silence. I excused myself. Outside, the noise softened. Santa Monica traffic hummed in the distance. I walked down the street, shoes clicking against pavement I'd walked for years. The same pavement I'd driven up and down, looking for the perfect building. The same sidewalk I'd paced when the first bank denied my loan. The same curb I'd sat on, knees up, when I signed my first lease and called it a win. I turned to look at the showroom. The glass walls shimmered. Behind them, my sister's laugh bounced between steel and leather. My staff nodded at her every word. I saw my name called well in metallic gold letters. She never changed it, just buried it. I thought of my first customer, the one who drove in because he'd taken the time to answer his questions online when no one else would. I remembered painting the baseboards myself because the contractor flaked. I remembered begging the city to fast-track my license application. I remembered all of it. I was never trying to be famous, just honest, just worthy. When I stepped back inside, I didn't cause a scene. I didn't cry. I walked straight to the reception counter, smiled at a client, and offered her espresso. She smiled back, almost startled by my warmth. Then Valora caught my eye across the room. Her stare wasn't curious or kind. It was sharp, territorial, like it touched something that didn't belong to me. But it did. All of it. I turned away from her. I needed a plan, not a confrontation. This wasn't the moment. But I would have one. That evening, I sat at my desk in the office. The room was dim, blinds half drawn. the sound of distant traffic crawling through the windows. I opened a blank document on my laptop, and I typed the first line. Not out of anger, not even out of pain, but clarity. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a letter that made silence into a sound they couldn't ignore. The words were clinical, calculated, and legally binding. This time, I wasn't playing defense. I emailed the document to myself, closed the laptop, and stared at the slow swirl in my coffee cup. I didn't sleep that night. Not from anger, but because something inside me had shifted subtly, like a floorboard finally giving under years of weight. Saturday started quietly. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, but cautions. I made coffee in my condo kitchen and leaned on the counter while scrolling through my phone. Notifications fluttered in like confetti likes, tags, reposts. Her face, again. My showroom, again. Valora had posted a slick video reel of herself twirling in front of the showroom windows. She'd tagged her brand in bold white font and captioned it, "My space, my aesthetic, my story." I watched the video twice, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. She used the tagline I created 3 years ago, "Built from grit, shaped by grace." The same words I wrote in a journal at 2 a.m., with tears smudging the ink. She delivered it with a smirk, camera zooming in as if she were the architect of all of it. I didn't comment. I didn't call. I screen recorded the video, bookmarked the post, and saved the audio. I knew what I was doing. She didn't just take the room, I whispered aloud, the words strange in my empty kitchen. She took my words too. By late morning, I was on a call with Devonthi freelance designer who'd helped me with my original branding. He hadn't changed. Still polite, still slightly too eager. "Hey, Brielle. I've been meaning to check in. Saw some of the new stuff going out. Looks like things are booming." I paused. "Devon, have you sent any of our old files to Valora?" Silence. Then a cough. "She asked for the editable logo files last month. Said it was a family collaboration, that you were both rebranding together. Seku thought it was all above board." "Did she use my original deck?" I asked, calm. "Just parts of it," he muttered. "The intro slides, the aesthetic palette." Honestly, I didn't think twice. "No worries," I replied. "Thanks for confirming." I hung up and sat in my chair without moving. My fingers tapped the edge of the table without rhythm. I wasn't surprised. I was tired of being surprised. By late afternoon, I was driving downtown. The traffic was sluggish, the air thick. I parked 2 blocks from the building and walked the rest of the way. The trademark office was sterile and quattro after row of computers. Beige walls. The faint click of keyboards. Thomas had helped me file our original name rights when I opened. I pulled up the database and typed in Caldwell Concept. The first result wasn't mine. A limited-use trademark request had been submitted under Valoris LLC filed 2 weeks ago. She had included photos of the showroom, brand pitch decks, color scheme references. It was my work, only with her name attached. I printed the screen and slid it into my folder. The sun was setting when I got back to my car. The streetlights flickered on as I buckled my seatbelt. I didn't drive immediately. I sat there, hands on the wheel, eyes on the red lights ahead. It wasn't about the logo. It wasn't about the caption, the video, the champagne, or the laughs. It was about my name, my risk, my rebuild, and how easily someone could steal it just by saying, "We're family." It used to sting. Now it just made things clear. That night, I opened my phone one more time and reread her caption. Every inch of this showroom reflects my journey. I felt something in me break. That night, I reread the caption she wrote. She said, "Every inch of this showroom reflects my journey." I felt something in me break. And when something breaks quietly, you don't scream, you sharpen. Sunday came with overcast skies, and just enough wind to lift the edges of my coat as I walked up the steps to the community center. The event was a brunch for local businesswomen, something it helped fund years ago, before it had a sponsor, before it had glossy brochures. Now it had a banner with Valora's name printed in cursive at the top and a crowd sipping mimosas like they were at a fashion show. I stood near the back, nursing weak coffee from a paper cup, not expecting much. I should have known better. The projector screen lit up with a slideshow of the showroom, the one I leased, painted, and opened with my first business loan. The one where I used to sleep in the back office during late-night audits. Valora took the mic and gave a little laugh, the kind that made the room lean in. I always tell people, she started, success comes from the strangest places. My sister and I used to clean cars together. She wore this big red apron, we called her Cherry. The room erupted. My throat didn't tighten, my eyes didn't sting, but something inside me slid sideways. They laughed because it sounded like a cute memory, something lighthearted, something shared. But that apron wasn't a punchline. It was survival. I bought it for $6.99 from a clearance rack at a hardware store. I wore it every evening after school when I scrubbed wheels for tips and wiped down dashboards in the winter cold. While Valora was at mixers and rooftop parties, I was kneeling in oil stains, my hands raw, my back sore. She never cleaned cars. She never touched the hose. I left without finishing my coffee. No one noticed. They were too busy clapping. Outside, the wind had picked up. I kept walking until the noise behind me disappeared into the street. Across from a closed bookstore, I sat on a weather-worn bench and stared at the sidewalk like it might explain something. The red apron. The janitor's closet where I used to change clothes before night shifts. The smell of bleach mixed with cheap citrus cleaner that stuck to my skin. The calluses on my palms I used to file down with sandpaper because I couldn't afford gloves. I'd buried all of it. Not out of shame, but out of strategy. Because when you grow up in a family where attention is currency, you learn early. Stay small, stay quiet, stay out of the spotlight unless you can guarantee applause. Valora had taken my quiet and turned it into a costume. You don't forget a red apron when it was all you had to protect your dignity, I murmured to no one. It wasn't just the lie. It was the ownership of my history, repackaged as a laugh line. I sat there for a long time, letting the truth settle, not the truth of what happened, but the truth of what it meant. She didn't just rewrite the story. She told it in front of a crowd that had no idea they were clapping for the wrong girl. That night, I stayed home. I didn't answer emails or calls. I opened an old storage bin in the hall closet and pulled out a file box. Inside, receipts, photos, handwritten schedules, grant rejection letters, and client thank you cards. I started laying them out on my kitchen island, one memory at a time, one proof point after another. Then, I grabbed a blank notebook and began drafting a timeline. Each entry had a date and a fact. No emotion, just markers of effort, of ownership. I pinned a photo of the red apron to the corkboard above my desk. It wasn't pristine. It had a bleach spot near the pocket and fraying along the hem, but it was real. Mine. I didn't feel broken, I felt awake, and I wasn't letting her write me out anymore. I wasn't erased, I was overwritten. And that's easier to expose. Sometimes a sister doesn't need to raise her voice, just raise a file folder. It was one of those Mondays where the air already felt brittle by noon, tense and sharp, like it was holding its breath. I had just poured myself a second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with Lorraine's name. I didn't pick up, not immediately. I watched the screen until the last vibration died out. It wasn't about playing games, it was about control. I wanted to decide the tone of this conversation on my terms, not hers. When I finally returned her call, I was calm, detached. She, on the other hand, sounded warm. Overly warm. Like someone trying to wrap poison in a velvet ribbon. "Brielle," she said, "can we meet for coffee? Just us." No pressure. It's been a while. There was pressure. The kind you feel in your chest when someone says no pressure. We met near the marina at a cafe that smelled like rosemary and entitlement. Lorraine was already there, seated at a corner table. Her blazer looked expensive but not loud, the kind of neutral beige that screams money only to people trained to notice it. She stood as I approached, arms opening just slightly. "You look well, Brielle." You too, I replied, settling into the seat across from her. We skipped small talk. No weather, no mention of holidays or how fast the year was flying. Lorraine was always surgical with her words when she had a mission, and today was no different. I've been watching things unfold, she began. The business, the buzz. Valoris really come into her own. There it was. The thesis statement. She connects with people, she continued, smoothing her napkin. Media, clients. She brings something magnetic to the room. That's a rare trait. I smiled faintly. Has she? Lorraine leaned forward, eyes soft but sharp. You've built something incredible truly. But sometimes, it's wise to let the one who shines shine. People remember the face, not the blueprint. I stirred my coffee, letting the silence expand just long enough to shift the energy. So what are you saying, Lorraine? That I become the ghost in my own legacy? Her tone stayed sweet, but her delivery was clean. Of course not. I am saying maybe take a quieter role. Behind the scenes, brand identity can suffer when it's split. I blinked slowly. Did Valora say that? Or did she just let you say it for her? Her smile didn't reach her eyes. This isn't about sides, Brielle. No? I raised an eyebrow. Then why does it feel like I'm being politely removed from my own table? She took a careful sip of her coffee and delivered the line I knew was coming. Some people build, some people shine. Valora shines. Let her. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I stood, smoothed out my jacket, and slid my chair back under the table. Thanks for the coffee. Outside, the wind off the water slapped my face, and I welcomed it. It wasn't refreshing, it was clarifying. Like the kind of cold that made you remember things. Made you remember who you were before the world asked you to shrink. At home, I climbed up to the top shelf of my closet and pulled down a storage box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were folders and binders, some of them warped from age, others still stiff like they'd been waiting. I dragged everything to the dining room table and spread them out like a case file. Contracts, handwritten notes, concept sketches, presentation decks, articles, my name in footnotes, in credits, on filing slips and headers. Valora's name didn't start showing up until much later, and even then, only in the glossy parts. The launch parties, the interviews, the magazine spreads, the curated side of a story already written. I worked through the night, creating a timeline. I highlighted discrepancies, dated everything. I didn't rush. I wanted it to be airtight. Not for vengeance, but for clarity. Because truth, once silenced, has to be louder when it returns. When I finally sat back, I opened a blank Word document. At the top, I typed, "If she insists on erasing me, I'll show them who built the ink she writes with." Then I sat there, letting the weight of that sentence settle into the room. I had always avoided confrontation. I was the quiet sister, the steady one. But erasure isn't silence, it's theft. And I had learned to document everything, not for applause, but for moments like this. Moments when your absence becomes your proof. Sometimes, people mistake the quiet ones for the forgettable ones. But it's the quiet ones who write everything down, who build the scaffolding and hand you the keys until one day, they quietly change the locks. I hadn't raised my voice. I didn't need to, because sometimes a sister doesn't need to shout. She just needs to raise a folder and let the truth speak for itself. I never liked confrontations, but theft of truth is a war I've trained for without knowing. The showroom sparkled under carefully arranged spotlights, every panel of glass polished to reflect a success story that had been rewritten. Thursday night's launch event was meant to debut the new luxury model, but it might as well have been a coronation. I arrived early, not to impress, but to prepare. I wasn't on the printed schedule, but I knew my name would still carry weight if only in the silence of a mission. Inside, the mood buzzed. PR girls fluttered between displays. Guests posed beside vehicles like they owned them. Local news crews hovered near the back, setting up tripods and testing sound bites. I checked in, gave a polite nod to Kellen, who barely returned it. The young intern who once handed me brochures now wore a headset and clip-on badge like she was running the show. I didn't see Veloriot. My reserved seat was marked. Row 2, far right, second row. I took it without protest. The first row had white orchids. Mine had shadows. Moments later, she appeared. In cream silk, with a custom nameplate pin resting just below her collarbone, Valora Gray, chief visionary. She waved to the cameras like royalty, her smile already choreographed. As the music faded, the MC took the stage. "Tonight," he began, "we honor not just innovation, but legacy. The Caldwell story isn't just about cars, it's about family, about reinvention, about the boldness to dream differently." He gestured toward Valora. And none of that would be possible without the guiding light behind this brand's evolution. Please welcome the woman reshaping luxury itself, Valora Gray. Applause erupted. I clapped with them, just slow enough to be unreadable. She took the microphone like it belonged to her hand. "I remember the early days," she said. "Late nights, ideas scribbled on napkins, chasing a vision nobody else saw. My father always told us, if you can find the right path, build it." So I did. And I've had help along the way, from people who saw in me what I was still discovering. She named Lorraine. She quoted our father. She did not say my name. The omission wasn't subtle, it was precise. I sat there, composed, while the crowd rose to their feet. A woman behind me whispered, "Isn't that her sister sitting there?" Another voice, "You'd think she'd be on stage." I turned slightly and smiled. Not yet. The program wrapped. Champagne glasses clinked. People lined up to take selfies with Valora in front of the display model. I wandered toward the far end of the showroom, away from the noise. That's when I heard her voice again. This time, from the main office. She was live streaming. Through the glass wall, I saw her phone propped against a branded stand. Behind her, the showroom looked like a magazine spread. "And this space," she was saying, "this space reflects my journey. Every inch tells a story, me story." I stepped into the doorway, just out of frame. "The team here," she continued, "they're not just co-workers, they're family." That's when I said it. Family doesn't forget who built the foundation. She froze. Not visibly, just enough that the curve of her sentence slipped. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway. The live stream comments slowed, then erupted with question marks and emojis. Someone off camera whispered, "Cut it." Valora pressed her screen, and the feed ended mid-frame. For a few seconds, no one spoke. She didn't say anything to me. I didn't need her to. The audience she cared about most had already heard what mattered. Valora's smile dropped first. Then the viewers started asking questions she couldn't answer. Some people fear confrontation. I fear becoming invisible more. The morning after Valora's livestream stunt, I sat in my home office with a cup of strong coffee and a file open on my desktop. The recording wasn't new. I'd had it saved for over a year, buried under folders marked legal and brand use. But I hadn't listened to it in a long time. I clicked play. She's good at scrubbing floors and staying out of the way. Let her do that. Her voice poured through the speakers like acid in slow motion. It was a recording from a call she hadn't known was being monitored back when she was trying to push me out of a supplier contract and thought she was talking to a friendly middleman. I didn't flinch. I just paused the file, labeled it with the date and timestamp, and saved it under a new folder. If needed. I texted Thomas. He was more than a lawyer. He was my friend, and the only one who never once acted like I was paranoid. I sent him the audio. A few minutes later, he called. "This isn't the kind of thing you toss out casually," he said. "You sit on it. Let her keep digging. When she's waist deep, you drop it." I closed my laptop. Understood. By late afternoon, I was driving toward Lorraine's house with a thank you basket I didn't want to give. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to, but I kept my face neutral. The house looked the same, white trim, manicured hedges, too many wind chimes. She greeted me like always, with a hug that never quite closed the gap between us. "You didn't have to," she said, motioning to the basket. "I know," I smiled. "But I wanted to." We sat in the sunroom. She talked about a foundation gala she and Valora had attended last weekend. I nodded when appropriate, responded when needed, waited for her to excuse herself for a phone call, which she did, like clockwork. As soon as she stepped into the kitchen, I walked down the hallway to the office. I knew she kept the safe in the same place tucked, behind a sliding panel in the bookcase, half hidden behind old property deeds. I pulled the panel, crouched down, and entered my father's birthday. The click was almost insulting in its ease. Inside was exactly what I suspected. The original, signed Wilmy, father's own handwriting, notarized, stamped, dated. The showroom was mine. Not shared, not partial, not pending. Mine. I photographed every page with my phone. I didn't touch anything else. When I closed the safe, I locked it with the same precision I'd used to open it. By the time Lorraine returned, I was already complimenting her on the new hydrangeas outside the window. That night, Valora called. No text warning, just the screen lighting up with her name. I let it ring once before answering. She didn't waste time. "We need to talk, so talk." Her tone shifted. "About the live stream." "It was nothing, a PR thing. Spontaneous." "You had a branded stand for your phone," I replied. "That's not spontaneous." Silence. "I'm not trying to erase you," she said. "You're just not as visible. I bring a different audience." I let her talk. It was always easier that way. Let them fill the air until their own words incriminate them. Then I spoke. "If you continue using my name, my story, or that showroom like you built it, it'll release two things. A recording and a will. Neither one flatters you." She exhaled sharply. "You wouldn't." "I didn't say I would," I replied. "I said I haven't. Yet." Another pause. This one longer. "You're threatening me now?" she said. "I am informing you. Call it what you want." I ended the call without waiting for a response. Then I sat back in the chair and let my breath settle. For once I didn't feel hollow. I felt certain. But she didn't retreat. She doubled down. That's when this stopped being personal and became war. Valoris' idea of war wasn't subtle. It was public, performative, and meant to humiliate. Saturday night, I walked into the ballroom of the Ashton Hotel, having RSVP to a last-minute invitation from an unnamed donor. It was a charity dinner at least on the surface. Velvet ropes, champagne trays, carefully dressed silence. The kind of event where people pretend they aren't watching each other, even though every eye scans every label, every hand placement, every whisper. I had no idea Valora would be there. Correction, I had no idea it was her event. Until Dean stepped on stage. Dean. My ex. He hadn't changed much. Maybe a little grayer at the temples. Maybe his suits fit better. But the eyes? Still calculating. He spoke about the importance of local entrepreneurs, community trust, and then introduced the woman behind the creative heartbeat of our brand partnership. My wife, Valora Gray. Applause thundered. I stood rooted to the floor, unsure if I'd laugh or walk out. Valora emerged from backstage like she belonged to the lighting. Cream-colored gown, gold earrings, her hand resting casually on Dean's shoulder like she'd never had to fight for anything in her life. And then she said it, loud enough for the nearby table and the camera crew to hear. "Funny how life works out," she smiled. "I got the company. And the man." People laughed, some uncomfortably, some easily. I didn't. I found a seat near the back, away from the stage, and stayed through the dinner out of something that felt like dignity, but may have just been defiance. I listened to her speech flowery, empty, wrapped in false gratitude. After dessert, I stepped outside. The garden was lit with soft strings of lights, and the air had cooled just enough to remind me it was still real life. That's when I heard a small voice behind me. "Are you Mommy's assistant?" I turned. It was Tinsley, Valora's daughter, 7, maybe 8, wearing a glittery headband and holding a half-melted cake pop. "I'm sorry?" I asked gently. She smiled, wide and innocent. "Mommy said you used to clean for her. That's why you know everything about the showroom." I crouched to her level. Is that what she said? She nodded, pleased to be helpful. Thank you for telling me, I whispered. That's very kind. Then I stood, walked back into the ballroom, and found the nearest exit. By the time I got home, my skin felt like it had been peeled back layer by layer all evening, the kind of raw that doesn't bleed, it just burns. I poured a glass of water, set it down untouched, and went into my office. There, in a file box I hadn't opened in years, was a photograph. Faded, a little bent. Me and Dean. Before Valora. He had his arm around me, not possessively, but naturally. I looked happy. Naive. I remembered what he used to say when I worked late. You'll never be soft enough for family, Brielle. You're all edge and numbers. And Valora? She'd watched that crumble, then stepped into the life I'd been building without ever picking up a hammer. She didn't want her own story. She wanted mine, just without the weight. I walked to the whiteboard on my wall, picked up the marker, and wrote, my name, my father's trust, my business, my future. She's after all of it. I stared at the list until the letters blurred. I had one thing left that was undeniable, the truth, and it was time the world heard it, raw and uncut. If she wanted my life so badly, she could keep the fiction. I'd bring the facts. By Thursday afternoon, I was already at the showroom when it happened, and come in to meet with the finance team about quarterly reports, trying to keep my head down, keep the work moving. But fate doesn't wait for permission. A walk-in client, young, confident, holding her phone like it was a third hand asked for a tour. Valora, of course, stepped forward with her signature rehearsed enthusiasm. This space? She said with her trademark smile. Oh, it's mine. All of it. I shaped the experience top to bottom. You see, my sister used to mop floors. Now she pretends to run empires. The words sliced through the room like a blade. I was in the next room, just outside view, hearing every word. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, it was worse. It was casual. The kind that says, we all understand who matters here. The client didn't say anything, but I saw her glance sideways, a slight frown forming. I didn't know at the time that she was live streaming. That video hit TikTok less than an hour later. Title? Luxury Lady Destroys Sister's Dignity at Her Own Showroom. By dinner time, it had crossed 1 million views. By morning, the comment sections were wildfires. Wait, she said used to clean floors? She's the real owner? This feels like textbook erasure. Where's the sister? We want her side. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. I spent that evening in my home office with Thomas. We pulled up weeks of security footage, clip by clip. In one video, Valora was introducing herself to a visiting investor as co-founder and head of creative. In another, she was accessing my private files from the main office desktop. Then there was the final Clifford whispering to Kellen, instructing him to remove my name from the presentation slides before sending them to a sponsor. Thomas packaged it all neatly on a USB and walked it into the offices of 3 different reporters he trusted. Not tabloids, legitimate business outlets, the kind that care about evidence and ethics. Then I wrote my statement. Friday morning came with overcast skies and a tension that felt like static in my teeth. I stood outside the showroom, a small podium set up by the front steps. Microphones blinked red with recording lights. Reporters stood at a polite distance, notebooks ready. I didn't wait for silence. I spoke like I was telling a room full of old friends the truth they already suspected. I built this place with my own hands, with every dollar I saved, with every late night spent arguing with banks and painters, with my father's trust and a belief that hard work was enough. I paused, scanning the small crowd. What was taken wasn't just a title or a spotlight. It was my name, my story. But I'm taking it back. I gestured to the portable screen behind me and hit play. The video was short, just enough. Valora's voice came through first, her laugh, her words, her erasure. The crowd didn't gasp, they shifted. You could feel the current change in their eyes. Valora's team issued a statement within the hour. She deeply regrets any misunderstandings. I didn't respond. The showroom stayed open that day. Business continued, but the air had changed. Clients looked at me differently. Staff offered eye contact. The silence that used to hum with dismissal now buzzed with recognition. But peace? No, not yet. The truth was out, but peace hadn't arrived. Some wounds still needed a reckoning. Just because you win doesn't mean you heal. Some things still echo in the silence. The showroom was still. Still in the way a space can only be after a storm has passed and taken the noise with it. 1 week had gone by since the press conference, and the silence felt earned. No reporters at the windows now. No anxious footsteps. No accidental flashes of a camera lens through the bouquets at the entrance. Just the gentle hum of the HVAC and the quiet, steady clicks of my heels as I crossed the polished tile floor. It was early Sunday morning, the kind of morning where the light filters in soft and slow, spilling through the tall windows like it, too, had decided to exhale. Then the front door chimed. I turned toward the sound, expecting a delivery or a client who'd mistaken the hours, but it was Marilla Boone. The same woman who had once stood at the back of the conference room, silently watching as I was interrupted, dismissed, and spoken over. Now she stepped through the door with deliberate grace, her burgundy beret angled just so, her coat buttoned to the collar. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried something deeper, older than sympathy and gentler than pity. It was something like earned respect. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice as even as ever. "Not at all," I said, already walking to meet her. She held out a small envelope. It wasn't thick or grand, just plain ivory paper, folded with care. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for reminding me that dignity still matters in this world. I'm not someone who knows much about business, but I do know when someone is being wronged. And I know what it looks like when someone decides not to let that be the end of the story." I didn't trust myself to speak right away. I took the envelope with a small nod, swallowing a lump that came quicker than expected. Her words weren't grand or rehearsed, but they hit me in a place that still felt bruised. She left soon after. No fanfare, no lingering. I didn't open the envelope until later. Inside, a short handwritten note in blue ink, cursive letters leaning gently to the right. It simply said, "Some people speak loudly, others speak clearly." I heard you. I sat with those words for a long time. She hadn't praised my win or my strategy. She'd seen me not for what had proven in court or in front of cameras, but for what I had chosen to carry with composure when it would have been easier to throw it all down. That afternoon, Thomas called. "It's done," he said without preamble. "The trademark is secure. The tax filings are in. Valoris LLC was dissolved last Friday." A beat of silence passed between us. "Media pressure did what courtrooms couldn't," he added. I leaned against the window frame, looking out at the street below. "She gave it up?" I asked. "Technically? Yes. Publicly? She's still spinning it." He forwarded me the press release. The headline read, "Valora Drayton announces graceful exit from company for sake of family unity." I read the statement aloud, tone flat. Sometimes letting go is the most powerful choice. A breath escaped me, half laugh, half disbelief. "She never knew what unity meant," I murmured. But I didn't need her apology. I didn't need headlines or retractions. What I needed, truly, was for the silence that followed to feel different. And that's what I got. That evening, after the final client's car pulled away and the showroom lights dimmed to their warm golden hue, I wandered the space alone. I walked past displays, each now arranged with intention. I passed the conference nook, the tall ficus in the corner, the samples arranged by tone and texture. All of it now felt like mine again, not because a court had ruled it, but because I had reclaimed it, piece by piece. Eventually, I reached the hallway near the back, the one clients rarely saw. It was where deliveries were signed for, where staff took coffee breaks and laughed in quiet corners. And there, behind a glass panel just above the coat hooks, was the red apron. Pressed. cleaned, framed. No title, no inscription, just fabric worn and simple and memory. It hung at myself that morning, without ceremony. It wasn't there for clients to admire or to spark conversation. It wasn't even there for Valora. It was for me. I stared at it for a while, arms folded across my chest, the silence around me now a friend rather than a punishment. In that small frame, I saw everything E'd once been taught to hide. Effort, labor, roots. And now, pride. I used to think power looked like a microphone, that it had to be loud, public, sweeping. But now I know it can also look like something quietly permanent, something you mount behind glass, not to forget, but to honor. A thought came then, unexpected and unplanned. Forgiveness isn't always a door you open. Sometimes it's a door you lock so you can finally walk past it. Sometimes surviving the storm isn't the story, it's what you do with the quiet afterward that matters. I didn't fight for revenge. I fought for recognition. Not to be applauded, but to be seen. If this journey taught me anything, it's that silence can be power, but only if you know when to hold it and when to break it. To those of you watching, maybe you've had your name taken out of something you built. Maybe your story was retold without your consent. Maybe, like me, you've sat in a room full of people clapping for someone else and wondered if it was worth speaking up. Let me tell you, it is. You don't need to shout to be heard. But when you do speak, make sure it's with clarity, not anger. With truth, not noise. Stand your ground not to win a spotlight, but to reclaim your foundation. What about you? Have you ever felt erased in your own life, at work, in your family, or in your community? What did you do about it? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. If this video resonated with you, type 1 in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't, tell me why. I value every perspective. If you want to hear more stories that hit close to the heart and honor the quiet strength inside us all, don't forget to subscribe. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And I'm here to tell more stories just like this one.
Hello, my name's Viandra, and this isn't a story I ever thought I'd tell out loud. They said the jacket didn't matter, that it was just old cloth taking up space. But it was the one thing my grandfather left me, just me, not my brother, not my mother, me, until they sold it behind my back to buy my brother a gaming computer. No warning, no conversation, just gone. But then, a stranger showed up at my door, holding the jacket, and a secret sewn into its lining, one that proved I was never meant to be forgotten. What else had they buried with his memory? And what would I have to uncover to get it all back? I didn't cry at the memorial. I stood with my hands clasped, watching the flags wave in the soft May breeze, and I listened to the names being read aloud, one by one, like footsteps fading down a long hallway. But I didn't cry. It wasn't until I stepped back into the house that the first crack opened. The scent of lemon cleaner hit me before I even set down my purse. That meant my mother had been scrubbing again, probably the hallway shelves, the baseboards, or the display case in the entry. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the lighting was different, dimmer, wrong. I turned, eyes moving to the spot just beside the stairs. The glass case was empty. I froze, keys still dangling from my fingers. The jacket, Grandpa's jacket, gone. For a second, I thought maybe it had been moved. Maybe my mother had taken it out to air it or have it cleaned. I stepped closer, palm pressed to the glass, a faint smudge of fingerprints, fresh. The interior lights were off. The base velvet where the jacket usually lay was still there, dustless and cold. I called out, my voice catching. "Mom?" The kitchen clatter didn't pause, just the sound of water running and the click of something against ceramic. "Mom!" I called again, sharper this time. She answered without turning. "Oh, that? We sold it." The words dropped like ice into my chest. "What?" She finally turned to face me, hands drying on a dish towel. "The jacket. Kellen needed a new computer, and we figured, well,
It was just sitting there. You're not doing anything with it. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. My mind was trying to rearrange her words into something else, something that made sense, something I could believe. You sold Grandpa's military jacket? My voice sounded small, foreign. For a good cause, she said, returning to her task. Kellen's starting that gaming project. His old PC was a brick. This will help him get moving. I stood there, still holding my keys, like I had stumbled into someone else's life. Denton came into the kitchen then, carrying a folder. He glanced at me and, without even asking what was wrong, said, "Let's be real, V. He's got vision. You're holding on to dust." I turned toward Kellen's room. A soft LED glow spilled out from the cracked door. I didn't need to knock. The sound of keys clicking, a video playing in the background, the rhythmic thump of a bass-heavy soundtrack. My brother had already moved on. At dinner, I tried again, quietly, carefully. "I would have liked to have been asked," I said, watching my fork scrape across the plate. "It meant something, that jacket. It was promised to me." Marvette looked up from her glass. "It was promised? He said that?" I nodded once. "He gave it to me before he passed. I kept it right there for a reason." She smiled thinly. "And now it's funding your brother's future. Seems fitting to me." Kellen didn't look up from his phone. I couldn't eat. My throat was tight, my stomach sour. "I would have bought him a computer," I murmured. "I would have helped." "That's not the point, V," Denton said, reaching for the salt. "It's about initiative. You're always just hanging back, holding on to things. Kellen? He's building something." I don't remember finishing my plate. I don't remember what they talked about after that. I just remember getting up slowly, taking my glass to the sink, and walking back to the hallway. I stood in front of that empty case like I was at a funeral no one had invited me to. The plaque was still there, shiny and perfectly centered beneath where the jacket used to be, in honor of Sergeant Daniel Rhodes. Nothing else remained. I stood there until the house quieted, until the lights in Kellen's room dimmed and Denton's snores kicked in from down the hall. I stared at the velvet padding inside the case, feeling like something had been stolen not just from me, but from him. That jacket had been his armor, his identity, and mine, because he didn't just give me a coat, he gave me his trust. Now it was gone. I backed away slowly, heart numb, soul heavy. Then the doorbell rang, and the past showed up on my doorstep. I didn't rush to the door. There was something about the way that bell echoed down the hallway, how it lingered in the quiet. My hand was still trembling from the night before, still clenching that last ounce of what I thought was mine. That glass case had been a monument. Now it was just an empty frame. When I finally opened the door, a woman stood there with a calmness that felt almost reverent. She wore a dark green coat and held a sealed box against her chest like she was carrying ashes. Her eyes met mine, steady but soft. "Are you Viandra Rhodes?" she asked. I nodded, my voice stuck somewhere between my chest and throat. She offered a small, respectful smile. "My name's Coletta Warren. I believe this belongs to you." I looked down at the box. Plain, unlabeled. She held it out with both hands like it was sacred. "I bought it at the Polk County Estate auction 3 days ago. It didn't feel right. Not once." My fingers hesitated, but then they closed around the box, cold against my palms. We stepped into the living room without saying much else. The silence was thick, not awkward, just full of something unspoken. She waited until I sat on the couch before she took the armchair across from me. It was only then she let out a slow breath, like she'd been holding it for days. "I'm a military widow," she said. "My husband served in Iraq.
He knew Sergeant Daniel Rhodes, talked about him a lot, said he was the kind of man who didn't ask for anything but gave everything. My throat tightened. I recognized the unit patch the moment I saw the jacket, she continued. And when I read the plaque inside, I had a hunch it wasn't meant to be sold. It felt displaced. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, voice lowered. So I went looking. That was the moment it hit me. This woman, a complete stranger, had cared more about my grandfather's memory than my own family did. I had to dig, she said. Your name wasn't in the auction records, but the library had your staff photo from a talk you gave last year on military archives. Then I saw the surname, Rhodes. That was enough. I couldn't speak. The box sat on my lap, untouched, my fingers curled around the edge. May I? She asked gently, gesturing to the box. I nodded. She opened it slowly, peeling back a layer of tissue paper. And there it was, folded with precise military neatness, his jacket, the same creases, the same texture, the scent still faintly clung to it, cedar, sweat, something like motor oil. I reached for it, slowly, like I was afraid it might dissolve. My hands trembled as they grazed the edge, and then, God help me, I pressed the fabric to my face and just breathed. A tear slipped free, just one. It wasn't grief, not exactly. It was release. I'd been holding it all in for too long. Coletta didn't interrupt. After a while, I cleared my throat. Thank you, I whispered. She nodded, eyes wet but firm. There's something else, she said. I didn't read it. But inside the jacket, along the lining, there's something sewn in, hidden. I noticed it when inspecting for damage. It felt intentional. I looked down at the jacket again, tracing the edge with my thumb. I didn't want to violate the trust, she said. But I had the feeling it was meant for you. She stood up slowly, brushing imaginary dust from her coat. I hope this gives you back whatever they tried to take. She didn't wait for thanks, didn't wait for anything, really. Just smiled, nodded, and let herself out the front door, pulling it closed behind her with quiet finality. The room felt colder when she left, quieter. I placed the jacket gently on the coffee table, smoothing the fabric like it was alive. Then I turned it over and began examining the lining. Near the left seam, just above where the inside pocket sat, I felt it, something stiff under the cloth. A small rectangular ridge. Using a pair of manicure scissors from the drawer, I carefully snipped a few threads. Not enough to damage anything, just enough to reveal the hidden fold. Inside was a strip of folded paper, yellowed slightly at the edges. I opened it slowly. My grandfather's handwriting was there, tight, slanted, precise. V. If you're reading this, something happened. This jacket isn't supposed to be anywhere but with you. If it's not, it means something went wrong. Ask Harlan Graves. He knows where the rest is. You were always the quiet one, the observer. But I saw you. I always did. Love, Grandpa. I stared at the note, every line of it ringing in my chest like a church bell. They hadn't just sold a jacket. They'd tried to erase me, but Grandpa saw that coming. I didn't move for a long time after reading that note. I sat there on the edge of the couch, jacket in my lap, the faded words etched into my mind like they'd been burned there. Ask Harlan Graves. That name hit something buried deep. I hadn't heard it in years, but it rang familiar. One of those names Grandpa used to mention when he talked about the past with the quiet reverence reserved for old comrades or poker buddies who'd never broken their word. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of the jacket. My hands felt steadier than they had any right to. The rest of the day passed in a kind of slow-motion haze. I avoided my mother. She didn't ask where I'd gone that morning, and I didn't offer it. We danced around each other in that old kitchen like strangers passing on a sidewalk. But something had shifted inside me, some cord pulled tight enough to snap. By late afternoon, the sunlight slanted low through the blinds in my bedroom, casting long shadows across the carpet. I sat at the foot of the bed, jacket draped over my knees. My fingers kept tracing the hem like they could coax more answers from the stitching. And then, without meaning to, I found myself staring at the backyard. That image came back so suddenly, it almost knocked the wind out of me. 2 years ago, not long after Grandpa's funeral, I'd come home from work to find my mother in the backyard, feeding old papers into the fire pit. It had struck me as odd then. She never used that thing. I'd leaned out the sliding door and asked what she was burning. "Just cleaning out your grandpa's old files," she said, tossing another armful into the flames. "Junk. No need to keep clutter." I hadn't pushed it at the time. Grief fogs your judgment. You tell yourself not to pick fights when everyone's still raw. But now, I could see it so clearly. I remembered one sheet catching in the wind as she fumbled. I'd caught a glimpse of Grandpa's handwriting, and not just his, my name was written on the corner. She burned his words. She didn't just throw away papers. She made sure no one would read them. That realization crawled through me like ice. By dusk, I was out in the garage. The air inside was dry and heavy with old wood and motor oil. I pulled on the chain hanging from the ceiling light, and the single bulb flickered to life. Behind the shelves, tucked where no one ever looked, was an old steel box. Grandpa's box. The one he kept his serious papers in, insurance, discharge records, medals, the will he never wanted to talk about. It was empty, not just cleared out, wiped, no dust, no rust ring, no remnants, as if it had never held anything at all. I knelt there for a moment, the cold from the concrete floor bleeding through my jeans. My jaw clenched so hard my temples ached. This wasn't an accident. This was a decision. Back inside, I dug out an old phone book from the hallway drawer and ran my finger down the G's until I found it. Graves, Harlan. Still listed. Still local. I stared at the number for a long time before dialing. It rang twice before switching to voicemail. His voice was older than I remembered, a little raspier, but unmistakable. I didn't leave a message, not yet. Instead, I called the one person I hadn't spoken to in months, Aunt Roslyn. She and Mom had a falling out a while back, something vague, something about wills and resentment and who should have gotten what when Grandma died. I never took sides. I stayed neutral, like Switzerland with a library card. She answered on the second ring. "V?" Her voice was cautious. "Hi, Aunt Roz. I need to ask you something. About Grandpa." There was a long pause. I heard her exhale. "You okay?" she asked finally. "No," I said, "but I think I'm getting there." We talked for nearly 20 minutes. I told her about the jacket, about the auction, about the note I found, and what I remembered from the fire pit. She listened without interrupting, and then she said something that cracked something inside me wide open. "Your grandpa used to say you were the only one in that house who really saw him. He worried they'd erase him after he was gone, especially from you." My breath caught. "He said you listened, that you paid attention. That's why he trusted you with things he never told the rest of us." The words sank deep, not just into my memory, but into the marrow of me. He knew this would happen. He saw it coming, and still, he chose me. I hung up gently, thanked her, then sat back in my chair and looked down at the jacket once more. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like resolve. I wasn't crying anymore. I was planning. I didn't sleep that night. not because I was restless, but because something in me had finally decided there'd been enough silence. When the sky began shifting to that soft, steel gray tone just before dawn, I was already at the kitchen table with my laptop, a mug of black coffee cooling by my elbow. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional shuffle of Kellen's footsteps upstairs, probably gaming through the night again. I waited until I heard his door close, his ritual 7 a.m. crash after a night spent online, and then I moved. I needed to see how deep this betrayal really ran. I opened the old shared backup drive that we'd used back when Dad was still alive. It was mostly forgotten now, buried in the corner of the living room computer, hidden behind folders labeled taxes, receipts, and mom photos. But I knew my brother. Kellen never deleted anything. He just renamed it and pretended no one would look. Deep inside a folder labeled School Projects 2017, I found another folder, then another, and then finally one labeled Legacy Archive. It was buried under layers like someone trying to forget their own footprints. I opened it. Hundreds of files filled the screen. Each file name was familiar. Purple Heart, PNG. Mom Pop Wedding Toast, MP4. Flag Case, Item 043. Rhodes/Metal Group 03. They weren't school projects. They were everything Grandpa ever left behind. Every piece of his life, digitized, itemized, and priced. My fingers scrolled through the list with a numb sort of rage growing in my chest. Each photo was paired with a caption, most of them typed in lowercase like they meant nothing. Old junk from basement, $75. Box of war pins, unconfirmed, sold on eBay. Shadow box, grandma's maybe, sold. There was even a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet. Kellen had logged the items by sale date, amount earned, and what he used the money for. GPU upgrade, studio mic, Steam credits. One entry just read, coat equals RTX 3060. He sold Grandpa's legacy for a graphics card. I closed the laptop slowly, sat back, and let the weight of it settle over me like cement. It wasn't about sentiment anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. Dismantled heritage, repackaged and sold off like clearance junk. By late afternoon, the house smelled like roasted vegetables and lemon chicken. Marvette was at the stove humming to herself, and Denton sat at the kitchen island reading the paper like it was any other day in the Rhodes household. I stepped in and dropped a printed copy of the spreadsheet on the counter between them. "What's this?" Marvette asked, barely glancing up. "Proof," I said, "of what you did." She picked up the page, skimmed it, then set it down like it was nothing more than a grocery list. We discussed it. Those things weren't doing anyone any good in a closet. "They were mine," I said, my voice tight but steady. "They were your grandfather's," she snapped back. "And he's gone." Denton didn't even look up. He just kept sipping his tea. "Is this how you justify it?" I asked. "Selling every memory of him off piece by piece? Funding Kellen's fantasies while pretending you were preserving some kind of legacy?" "Kellen's building a future," Marvette said flatly. "All you've ever done is hold on to the past." I pulled the folded note from the inside of my shirt pocket and placed it gently on the counter next to the spreadsheet. It wasn't dramatic, just deliberate. This was sewn inside the jacket. She didn't touch it, just glanced once and shrugged. "It's not a legal document, it's a note." "Doesn't change anything." She turned back to the stove. That shrug, more than the lies, more than the auction, more than Kellen's carelessness, that single gesture did something irreversible. "You didn't just erase him," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You tried to erase me." She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. Denton flipped the newspaper page. I reached for the flash drive in my pocket, the one now loaded with copies of the spreadsheet, the photos, the listing history, the video files, even the metadata, and tucked it into my bag. I grabbed the jacket from the back of the dining chair, slung it over my shoulder, and walked out. No one followed me. Outside, the air had turned crisp. The sun was beginning to dip, casting everything in that soft gold you only get for 20 minutes a day if you're lucky. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't have to. That place hadn't been home for a long time. I walked until I reached the community library. It was closed, but I sat on the bench out front with my laptop on my knees, the flash drive plugged in. I opened a new folder and titled it simply, "For Harlan." If they wouldn't recognize my voice in that house, the court system would hear it loud and clear. I spent the rest of that night cross-checking legal terms, not on forums, not on social media, but through official court resource sites, public records, law blogs run by underpaid paralegals who knew more than they were allowed to charge for. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was building something out of it, something real. By mid-morning, I found myself outside a small office with weathered siding and an American flag bleached to near pink by too many Iowa winters. The faded sign read, "Harlan Graves, Attorney at Law, Retired." I parked across the street and stared at it for a full 5 minutes before stepping out of the car. Inside, the lobby smelled like old carpet and lemon oil. The place hadn't changed much since I was a teenager, except now it looked more like a museum than a workspace. No receptionist, just a single door with his name etched in a brass plate. I knocked. "Come in," came a voice, low and steady. I opened the door to find a man in his 70s, glasses on the tip of his nose, a yellow legal pad before him, pencil tapping. His hair had thinned since I last saw him, but the way he sat, still straight-backed and sharp-eyed, told me his mind hadn't aged the same way his body had. "Viandra Rhodes," he said, setting the pencil down. "You remember me?" I asked, stepping in. He gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. "Your grandfather used to bring you here when you were barely tall enough to see over the counter, said you had more sense than half the adults he knew." I sat down slowly, reaching into my bag and pulling out the note, the one from the lining of the jacket. I laid it on the desk and said nothing. He adjusted his glasses, read it once, then again, more carefully. "This is Daniel's handwriting," he murmured. "He always used that tight loop on his Y's and that sharp hook on the D's, no doubt about it." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Harlan stood, walked to a tall file cabinet in the corner, and pulled out a thick folder. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He flipped through it slowly, murmuring dates to himself. Then he stopped. He handed me a single-page document. Typed, "No signature." "He drafted a will," Harlan said. "Gave me this. Said he'd get it signed the following week. But before he could, your mother came in." I looked up. She said he changed his mind, brought this new version, also unsigned, but she insisted the original was invalid. "What did you do with his original draft?" He exhaled slowly. "I filed it away. I had no authority without a signature." I stared at the page in my hand. It was dated 3 weeks before Grandpa passed. One line glared up at me like a spotlight in the dark. "All personal items of sentimental or military significance to go to my granddaughter, Viandra Rhodes." "She buried this," I whispered. "She never told me." Harlan nodded. "Not just you. She told me Daniel didn't want a funeral, didn't want a fuss, but I'd spoken to him 3 days before that. He was asking about military burial honors." I felt my fingers curl into fists on my lap. "What can we do?" He didn't rush his answer. "This isn't just about a coat anymore. If she knowingly suppressed a testamentary document, even if unsigned, to facilitate liquidation of those assets, well, it might constitute fraudulent transfer. It's murky, but not impossible. I raised my eyes. Can we stop the auctions? Potentially. If we can show intent to override Daniel's wishes, the court may pause any further dispersal of items until review. And the ones already sold? That's trickier, but not out of reach. I let that sit for a moment, let it breathe in the quiet between us. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about acknowledgement, about undoing what should have never been allowed in the first place. I want to proceed, I said finally, quietly, but I'm not backing down. Harlan smiled, soft and a little sad, just like your grandfather. By noon, I had digital scans of every relevant document, including both will drafts. Harlan prepared an affidavit stating he'd witnessed Daniel's clear intent before death. He gave me a contact at the county clerk's office and outlined next steps. Instead of going home, I drove straight to the courthouse. The woman behind the window at records looked at me with mild curiosity when I handed her the documents. I told her I wanted to initiate a formal request for protective review of inherited military assets. Her eyebrows raised. She asked if I had representation. I gave her Harlan's name. Then she handed me a pen, name of petitioner. I hesitated for only a second. I wrote, Viandra Rhodes, relationship to decedent. I wrote, granddaughter, named recipient. And just like that, the line was drawn. I wasn't filing as someone's daughter. I was claiming what had always been mine, as Daniel Rhodes's heir. The courthouse was quieter than I expected that morning. The clerk's shoes clicked softly against the marble floor as she led me to the window where the official seal would be stamped. The folder in my hands felt heavier than any textbook I'd carried through school, though it held only 6 printed pages. When I walked out, the sun was higher. The chill in the air had lifted, but the tension in my spine hadn't. I didn't drive straight home. I didn't go to work. I pulled into the library parking lot, opened my laptop in the front seat of the car, and began writing one email after another, each more calculated than the last. The first went to my mother. Subject, legal petition filed. I've attached the documents submitted to the county for review. You should know that Harlan Graves is representing me in this matter. Further unauthorized sale of Daniel Rhodes's personal effects may constitute inheritance tampering under Iowa Civil Code. I didn't sign it with love. I didn't sign it at all. The second email went to Kellen. No preamble, no apology. You sold the medals, the letters, and the jacket. I've seen your spreadsheet. You cataloged every piece like it was a garage sale. I've submitted it all as evidence. If you want to fight over who Daniel Rhodes trusted, I'll let the courts decide. Then I sent a third, to myself, a blind copy, just to remember that I had drawn the line, finally, in writing. By the time I got back to the house, it was just after 2. The front door was unlocked. Marvette was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot she wasn't paying attention to. Denton sat at the dining table, scrolling his phone. The silence when I entered was immediate. Marvette didn't turn around. You had to take it public? She asked. You made it public the moment you sold off his legacy for parts. She didn't answer, but she did lower the heat on the burner. Kellen came down the stairs a few minutes later, barefoot, hoodie wrinkled, and hair matted like he hadn't seen a comb in days. You really want to drag this into court? He scoffed. Over some dusty boxes? Over the fact that you turned our grandfather into a catalog, I shot back. Grandpa left that stuff to the house, he said. You think it was all meant for you? I didn't blink. He told me so.
In writing. He laughed. That little note in the jacket? That's not a will. That's sentiment. No, I said calmly. That's intent. And when paired with the original will draft Harlan kept, yes, it carries weight. Marvette slammed the spoon into the sink, splattering sauce across the counter. You think dragging your family's name through the court system will bring him back? I turned toward her. I think pretending he never chose me already erased him. Denton's eyes lifted, just briefly. Do you even hear yourself, V? You're making this about you, as usual. I almost laughed. Instead, I opened my bag and pulled out the flash drive. I placed it on the table. Everything on this proves what you did. The listings, the sales, the money trails. I made sure it's all backed up. Marvette stared at it like it might bite her. And let me guess, Kellen added, you emailed it to the lawyers already, right? No, I said. To the veterans group and the local newspaper. Now Kellen looked rattled. You didn't. I did, I cut in. Because I'm not the one who disrespected a man's service for some online followers and a graphics card. He stepped forward, but Denton raised a hand. For the first time in years, he actually looked me in the eye. So what's your endgame? He asked. I don't want the medals. I don't want the jacket. I want acknowledgement. I want truth. And if that scares you, maybe it should. No one said a word. I turned and walked out, not waiting for anyone to follow. They wouldn't. They never had. By evening, I was back at the library, same bench, same quiet corner of the parking lot. I opened my laptop and checked my inbox. One reply, not from my family, from the legal affairs coordinator at the Veterans Memorial Committee. We'd like to invite you to speak at our upcoming remembrance event. We recently received troubling evidence about the sale of a veteran's belongings. You have our attention. I stared at the screen for a long time. They thought they could erase my name from his memory. Now I was engraving it back into the record books. The morning after the courthouse filing, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing, not ringing, buzzing, over and over like something was wrong. I checked the screen and saw a dozen notifications stacked up like bricks. Missed calls, texts, social tags, mentions. I didn't panic, but my gut told me this wasn't good. I pulled on a hoodie and padded barefoot to the kitchen, phone still in hand. Sunlight slanted across the floor like nothing had changed, but I knew better. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured myself half a cup, and opened the link my old coworker Marcy had just sent me. It was a live stream clip, uploaded, trimmed, captioned. My brother, Kellen, on a stage at some kind of tech startup event. A projector screen behind him showed a logo, Valor Loop Gaming, Legacy Meets Innovation. There he stood, smiling, arms outstretched, wearing the jacket, Grandpa's jacket. He had the sleeves rolled, paired it with dark jeans and a branded lanyard, as if it were a costume, as if he had earned it. I didn't blink, I just watched. Kellen paced the stage, full of charm and fake confidence. This isn't just about games, he said into the mic. It's about honoring the past while creating the future. My grandfather was a war vet. This jacket belonged to him. Then came the line that made my stomach turn. He wanted it passed down to the next builder in the family. That's me. The audience clapped. Someone whistled. A woman in the front row snapped a picture and tagged the startup's page. I scrolled through the comments. So touching. Love that vintage look. True American heritage right there. Respect. My jaw tightened. Respect? He had the nerve to wrap himself in something sacred and use it as marketing material. I closed the video and went to his page. There, front and center, was a carousel of images. Kellen at the podium with the jacket, posing beside a faux army jeep parked outside the venue. One caption read, "A legacy reborn." No, a legacy misused.
Within the hour, the Veterans Board I'd contacted last week had seen the same footage. I knew this because I received a private message from one of the committee chairs. "Is this the item you were referring to? We recognize that insignia. We'd like to speak with you in person." By midday, local message boards were circulating the clip. A few voices started pushing back. "Is this respectful? Should a gaming startup be profiting from authentic military relics? Is this real, or is he just playing dress-up?" The tide was turning, not fast, but enough to cause a ripple. Then came the email from Marvette. No greeting, no subject, just one line. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I didn't respond. She followed it an hour later with a voice message. "You're making this ugly. Your grandfather wouldn't have wanted this kind of attention. You're embarrassing the family." I deleted it without listening to the rest. By late afternoon, I walked down Main Street to the community center. A few veterans were already gathering for the upcoming event. When I introduced myself to the chairwoman, she gave me a firm handshake and said, "We've heard enough stories. Now we want the truth." I handed over the documents I'd prepared: Harlan's statement, the draft will, the auction listings, and yes, the screenshots of Kellen's startup stunt. "He's not just using the jacket," I said. "He's repackaged it. He's monetizing grief." She nodded, face unreadable. "You'll have the floor next Friday. People deserve to hear the other side." Walking home, I passed a local coffee shop. Someone inside waved. A girl from high school, maybe. She looked at me the way people do when your name's been whispered too many times in a week. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, jacket across my knees again. He would have hated this, Grandpa. But maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud that I didn't let them bury the truth in likes and logos. They thought they'd argue back with words. What they did next was broadcast my pain for everyone to see. I stepped out of the Veterans Hall into the crisp night air, the jacket carefully folded in my arms. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to say anything. I didn't need to defend myself, or explain, or try to correct the record. The record corrected itself. 2 days earlier, I received the invitation in a simple white envelope. Inside was a letter from the Des Moines Veterans Association, asking me to be a featured speaker at the Memorial Awards banquet. They'd seen the footage, they'd read the documents. They wanted my voice in a room full of people who understood exactly what silence costs. The night of the event, I parked 3 blocks away, not because I had to, but because I wanted the walk, wanted the air, wanted the time to think. The jacket was in a garment bag, slung over my shoulder like it had weight again. The hall was already full when I arrived. Rows of polished shoes, gray uniforms, clean suits, and dresses that shimmered under the soft lights. Names on badges, medals on chests. Generations gathered under one roof for one purpose: remembrance. I saw empty seats reserved near the front, mine among them. I took it slowly, measured. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I just knew why I was there. They didn't tell me my family would be there, but I should have known. I spotted them as I stepped onto the stage. Marvette sat stiffly in the back row, arms crossed. Denton beside her, face unreadable. Kellen was slouched in his chair, phone glowing in his hands. They didn't applaud when my name was announced. That was fine. The applause I was here for came from people who remembered sacrifice. I stood at the podium and didn't start right away. I let the silence breathe, let it stretch. Then I opened the jacket, still folded, and laid it across the podium. "This jacket," I said, "belonged to Sergeant Daniel Rhodes." No one moved. He wore it not to be seen, but to serve, not for glory, but for duty. He didn't talk much about the things he went through, but he never let those things erase his decency. I looked up briefly. I didn't scan the crowd. I looked at faces. And before he passed, he handed this to me, not because I'm perfect, not because I earned it, but because I listened. Because I saw him, even when others forgot he was still there. I held up the note, just enough to let the rows closest read the first few lines. He wrote something and stitched it into the lining. Words not meant to be spoken from a podium, but I'm going to say them anyway. I read them aloud. Every word. The room didn't shift. It settled. I didn't mention the court case. I didn't call out names. I didn't need to. What I said next wasn't in the script. Honor doesn't need applause, I said quietly. It needs memory. It needs someone who refuses to let it be sold off or scrubbed away. My grandfather gave me a piece of himself, not for the closet, not for the internet, but for the future, to remind me who I come from. There was a pause, and then, from the back of the hall, a sudden voice hissed through the stillness. You always wanted him more than I ever had. He gave you everything. It was Marvette. Eyes turned, a few gasps. I didn't flinch. I looked at her, finally looked at her, and said nothing, because she had just said everything. The silence that followed was full of understanding. I closed my speech with a simple sentence. I didn't come here to win anything. I came here to return what should have never been stolen, dignity. As I stepped down, a few veterans rose to their feet, then a few more. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, respectful, deep. A woman near the aisle reached out and touched my arm. You brought him home tonight, she whispered. A local reporter snapped a photo as I passed, me in a black dress, the jacket folded in my arms, eyes cast down, expression unreadable. The headline the next morning read, "The granddaughter who brought legacy back home." And that was enough. I left the hall with nothing but a folded jacket and more peace than I'd ever known under that roof. The night I left the hall, I didn't go back to the house I grew up in. I didn't stop by the apartment I'd been renting either. Instead, I drove until the gas light came on, pulled into an empty parking lot near a shuttered grocery store, and sat in the silence. The jacket rested in the passenger seat beside me, carefully folded, untouched since the ceremony. Somewhere between the applause and Marvette's outburst, something had shifted. Not in them, no, that was still the same. But in me, I wasn't carrying shame anymore, or trying to earn forgiveness that never came. I was carrying memory, legacy, and it felt lighter than all the silence I used to hold. 2 weeks later, I stood on the creaky porch of a modest 2-bedroom ranch on the west side of town. It had no grand entrance, no manicured lawn, just a sturdy mailbox, a wide window facing the street, and a front door that didn't creak when you opened it. It was mine. Bought with a combination of steady library paychecks, years of budgeting, and the insurance money Grandpa had tucked away, now released by the court. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but every floorboard, every nail, felt like a place where I was finally allowed to exist fully. I unpacked slowly. No rush, just a rhythm. I painted the kitchen a soft olive green, hung sheer curtains in the bedroom, brought in bookshelves before I even bought a television, and in the living room, right where the evening light hit around 6 o'clock, I installed the case, the same dimensions as the old one my mother kept. Only this time, I chose the lighting. I chose the glass. I chose the angle. Inside it, the jacket, backlit, clean, restored. Beside it, a framed copy of the note Grandpa wrote, the one she tried to bury. And next to that, a photo I'd almost forgotten I had. Grandpa in uniform, kneeling in the grass, laughing. Not posed, just real. I hadn't cried when I found that photo again. I did when I set it into the frame. On the second Sunday in my new place, Coletta stopped by. She brought coffee and warm banana bread wrapped in a tea towel. Her eyes scanned the living room. She didn't say anything at first, just walked to the case, looked at the way the light hit the display, and nodded. "It looks right here," she finally said, setting the bread on the table. "Like it always belonged to you." We sat for a while, sipping coffee, talking about nothing, which somehow said everything. At the door, she paused. "You know," she said, glancing back, "some families are blood. Some are just the ones who don't let you be erased." I didn't respond. Just placed my hand gently on her shoulder in thanks before watching her walk down the steps and back to her car. That night, I saw the voicemail light blinking on my phone. I knew the number before I tapped it. Marvette's voice was quieter than usual. "I didn't do everything right, but I was his daughter too. That was all. She didn't ask for anything, no apology, no explanation, just that sentence. I didn't delete it. I didn't call back either. Not out of anger, not even resentment. Just a knowing. Some bridges stay unburned but still impassable." I poured myself a cup of tea, turned off the main lights, and sat on the couch. The only glow came from the display case. Outside, the neighborhood was still. A dog barked a few blocks down. Someone's wind chime knocked gently in the breeze. And in that quiet, I whispered, "I got it back, Grandpa." And no one's taking it again. Sometimes the things we inherit aren't just objects, they're truths, responsibilities, and choices. Viandra didn't just fight for a jacket. She fought to be seen, to be heard, and to restore a legacy that others tried to erase. What would you do if the only piece of someone you loved was taken from you and no one else seemed to care? If this story moved you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories of courage, quiet revenge, and the strength it takes to stand alone.
Hi, I'm Marielle. I used to think family meant protection, meant safety. But when I told my mom that my stepdad had broken my arm to keep me quiet, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "You probably deserved it." They said I slipped. They said I was unstable. They even tried to sell the house my father left for me, behind my back with forged signatures, all because I knew something I wasn't supposed to hear. They erased my name from family photos, birthday cakes, and almost from the will that was mine. I was the quiet one, the obedient one. But now, I'm the one holding the keys. What would you do if your own family tried to write you out of your life? I remember that afternoon as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The sun had dipped just enough to cast long shadows across the back alley behind the bakery, the air thick with that end-of-summer dryness Amarillo is known for. You'd think a place that smells like sugar and cinnamon could never be the backdrop for something cruel. But that day, what hurt most wasn't the pop in my wrist or the way my breath caught when pain shot up my arm. It was how no one flinched, no one asked, no one cared. I'd walked into the back office because I'd forgotten my water bottle. That's all. Vernon was on the phone, pacing like he always did when he was making deals that weren't meant to be overheard. "If she finds out, we're screwed," he whispered harshly, his back turned toward me. I froze, hand still on the doorknob. Something told me to back away, but before I could, he turned. His face shifted the moment our eyes met. His voice dropped, cold and deliberate. "How long were you standing there?" "I just came in for—" He didn't let me finish. In 2 quick steps, he was in front of me. His hand gripped my wrist, tight. Then came the twist. A sharp, purposeful motion. I heard it before I felt it. The crack. Like the snap of a dry twig, loud in the silence between us. My knees buckled, but I didn't scream. I think that's what made it worse. I swallowed the pain, just like I had everything else since he moved in. Vernon leaned in, close enough that I could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. "Say a word about this," he hissed, "and I'll make sure you're out on the street with nothing. You hear me?" I nodded. I didn't trust my mouth not to betray the tears burning in my throat. He let go. I cradled my arm, backing away like some wounded animal. And just like that, he turned back to his desk, like nothing happened. By evening, I was at the bakery. Ramona didn't ask why I was holding my arm awkwardly, why I wasn't lifting trays with both hands. She glanced at me once and said, "Get the front window cleaned before the rush tomorrow, and don't forget to sweep under the display case." That was it. I wrapped my arm in a makeshift bandage using a dish towel and a rubber band. It was clumsy, barely held together, but I couldn't go to urgent care. We didn't have insurance, and I didn't have permission to leave. That was Vernon's favorite game, control through invisibility. Keep me small, keep me scared, keep me useful. The next morning, I was back on my knees scrubbing dried frosting off the tiled floor. Every time I reached forward, the pain throbbed like a reminder of what I knew and what I couldn't say. The customers were the usual crowd, old-timers talking politics, tired moms with strollers, teenage couples trying to act grown. Nobody looked at me, or if they did, they looked away fast. That's what people do when they sense something ugly happening. They pretend they didn't see it. I was broken, I remember thinking, but somehow I became invisible too. I saw Vernon once that morning, hovering near the register, watching me like a supervisor would watch a new trainee, waiting for a mistake. He smiled. That tight, cruel smirk that never reached his eyes. "You gonna mop or meditate?" he said loud enough for the front row of customers to hear. A few people chuckled. I didn't. I kept scrubbing. By noon, the bakery was full. The bell over the door wouldn't stop ringing, and every time I walked past the counter, someone seemed to whisper, "Is she okay?" But no one ever asked me directly. That's the trick. As long as you don't say it out loud, it doesn't become real. A man with a thick mustache leaned over the pastry case, pointed at me, and asked, "Did she fall off a horse or what?" Vernon didn't skip a beat. "She's just clumsy," he said. "You know how girls get when they're trying to do too much." The man laughed. Vernon laughed. I wiped down the table next to them with my good hand and held my breath. That laugh, that's what stayed with me. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was sharp, like a paper cut on pride. Quiet enough to fly under the radar, deep enough to bleed every time I remembered it. Later that afternoon, I had to run to the back office for more napkins. Vernon wasn't in there, but the drawer to his desk was slightly open. I reached in for the stack and paused when I saw the file. It had my name on it, except it didn't. It was spelled wrong. Marielle. A tiny mistake, but it stopped me cold. Why would there be a file on me? What was in it? I pulled it halfway out, enough to see a form. Bank something. But Vernon's voice from the hallway made me shove it back in and slam the drawer shut. I didn't know what I was looking at, but my stomach churned. He was hiding something. And deep down, I knew this broken arm was just the beginning. Whatever he didn't want me to hear that day, it had value. Real value. That's why he'd risk everything to shut me up. I told myself I'd remember. I wouldn't be like them, the people who flinched and forgot. I wouldn't let this be just another ugly thing that faded away. They were counting on me to disappear. I was going to do the opposite. I didn't walk home that night. I dragged myself. My wrist was throbbing, my entire arm pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, like it was reminding me of every second I chose to stay silent. I could have stopped at the clinic. I could have called someone, anyone. But the one person I kept circling back to in my head was my mother. Ramona. I didn't want justice. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted her to look me in the eye and say, "I believe you." When I finally made it to the front porch, it was nearly dark. The streetlights hummed, bugs tapping against their glow like they were trying to get out of the evening air. My hand hesitated at the doorknob. The kitchen window glowed with warm light. She was home. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell of baked chicken and buttered corn filled the air. She didn't turn around. "Mom?" I said softly, closing the door behind me. Still nothing. I walked in further, my steps uneven, cautious. She was standing at the stove, stirring gravy like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I stopped at the edge of the counter, wrapped my good hand around my broken wrist, and whispered, "Vernon hurt me." The ladle clinked against the side of the saucepan. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just stood there, spoon midair, eyes fixed on the bubbling surface. "Excuse me?" she asked, but not like she didn't hear me, more like she was buying time. I repeated it, slower, clearer. Vernon hurt me. She turned the burner off and finally faced me. Her eyes scanned my face, then my arm. Her jaw tightened. And then, in a voice low and dismissive, she said, "You're always looking for drama. Maybe you deserved it." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The floor beneath me shifted, like something cracked even deeper than the bone in my wrist. I started, but the words felt foreign. "You come in here," she snapped, "with your sad little eyes and that tone, always wanting someone to pity you. I am tired, Marie-Lee. Tired of the mess you bring into this house." I felt heat rise in my throat, not from anger, yet, but from disbelief. "He broke my arm, Mom, because I overheard him saying something about money, about hiding something." She stepped closer. "You don't know what you heard. And if you did, maybe you shouldn't have been snooping where you didn't belong." I didn't belong? My voice cracked. "You think I wanted to hear him talk about stealing? About making sure I stayed quiet? You think I tripped over myself for fun?" "I think," she said coldly, "you're embarrassing yourself. And this family." Something inside me rose then, something raw. "I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. He is." And just like that, she slapped me. It wasn't hard, but it wasn't soft either. It landed square on my cheek, and it didn't just sting, it branded. I staggered back, stunned. "Until you learn to behave like someone who lives in this house," she said with venom, "you don't belong here." Vernon walked in just then, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's going on?" he asked, like he'd just stepped in from saving the world. "She's accusing you," Ramona said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but control. "Of hurting her." He looked at me, then at her, then gave the most Oscar-worthy performance of his life. "Ramona, you know that's not true. She's been acting strange for weeks. We should get her help, maybe someone to talk to." "She doesn't want help," Ramona spat. "She wants a stage." My mouth went dry. "So that's it? You believe him over me?" Ramona crossed her arms. "Until you're ready to stop making scenes, I think it's best you leave." I remember laughing. It wasn't loud, it was bitter, like something sour that slipped out. "You want me gone?" She didn't say it again. I walked to my room, grabbed a plastic grocery bag, shoved in what I could: 2 shirts, my wallet, a phone charger, a book of poetry I couldn't bear to leave. My hand throbbed so badly, I almost passed out twice. No one stopped me. At the front door, I turned once more. She was already back at the stove. By the time I stepped off that porch, the ache in my chest had replaced the pain in my arm. I stayed with Jenna, an old friend from high school, for 3 nights. She didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't give too many answers. She offered me a spare futon and coffee in the mornings. It was enough. Vernon, however, wasn't done. By the second day, people started whispering. "She's unstable," I overheard one woman say at the grocery store. "He said she's been having episodes." At the bakery, a regular posted on Facebook, "Hope that girl gets the help she needs. You can't just go around accusing people of stuff." When Jenna confronted someone at the salon, they said, "She slipped on the bakery floor." That's what I heard. These young ones, always clumsy. I felt myself slowly disappear again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't invisibility. It was erasure. To keep my mind straight, I started writing things down. Not just what happened, how it felt. The way Vernon smirked when he passed me at work. The way Mom didn't even blink when she saw me packing. I needed to hold on to the facts before they got rewritten by someone else's version of events. One night, while Jenna was out, I sat by her window and flipped through an old notebook. Inside was a story my dad had once helped me write when I was 12. It was terrible, but he'd written something in the margins. "No matter how small your truth is, it's still yours. Don't let the world edit it." That sentence kept me steady. I wasn't going to let them edit me out of my own story. On the 4th morning, I passed by the bakery. I didn't mean to stop. I just wanted to see if it still looked the same. It did. Through the window, I saw Vernon behind the counter, smiling like the devil in an apron. A woman was laughing at something he said. And then, Ramona. She came out with a tray of cupcakes, placed them delicately in the display case. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't wave. She looked away, as if I had never existed. I clenched my cast against my chest, not to protect the wound, but to remind myself it was real. I turned and walked away. The walk from the bakery to the library wasn't far, but it felt like crossing into another world. I didn't bother checking the time. I just walked until my body stopped moving and my feet led me to the only place in Amarillo that still felt untouched by all the things I was trying to outrun. It was nearly dusk when I stepped inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above, mixing with the muffled sound of pages turning and keyboards tapping. I took a corner desk by the back window, the same one Dad and I used to sit at when he helped me write essays or apply for school scholarships. The spot was familiar in a way nothing else in my life felt anymore. I opened my old laptop, fingers stiff from the cold, but determined. The screen flickered on, password prompt blinking. I typed the date of my dad's birthday. Still worked. The desktop was cluttered with old documents, lesson plans, grocery lists, half-written letters. I searched through the files slowly, not really knowing what I was looking for, until a folder caught my eye. It was labeled, "If Anything Happens." I hesitated. My chest tightened. For a moment, I didn't want to open it. Like reading those words would make everything final, like I'd have to admit he was really gone. But I clicked anyway. Inside were only a few files, mostly documents I didn't understand, legal terms, scanned receipts, property evaluations. But one file stood out, draft email, Lionel.docs. I clicked it open, and there he was, his voice, his cadence, in black and white text. It read like he'd just written it that morning. Lionel, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the time to say these things face to face. Ramona's worried sick, and I can feel it in my chest more each week. I'm making peace with the idea that I won't see Marielle graduate, that I won't get to walk her down the aisle or watch her throw her first burnt Thanksgiving turkey in frustration. But I know what kind of man Vernon is. I've seen enough, and if something happens to me, I need you to protect what I've set aside for her. The scholarship account, the house title transfer, everything. Don't trust anyone else to handle it, not even Ramona. She'll mean well, but if she gets scared, she'll fold. Only give Marielle what's hers when you know she's standing on her own 2 feet and ready to fight for it. She's strong. Too strong to disappear. Love, Elias. I didn't cry right away. At first, I just sat there, stunned, staring at the screen while my pulse roared in my ears. Then my breath started shaking, and the tears came like a leak in the dam I didn't realize I'd been holding shut for years. He knew. Before I even knew what Vernon was capable of, Dad had already seen it. He'd tried to protect me the only way he could, by writing the future in a file folder, trusting that someone would hand it to me when I needed it most. I pulled out a USB drive from my backpack and saved the draft. Then I saved it again. Then I emailed it to myself. I was terrified it would vanish. Just like him. After packing up my things and thanking the sleepy librarian on my way out, I walked the 3 blocks to Jenna's house without hearing a single sound around me. The world had blurred. Everything I thought I'd lost. It wasn't lost. It was hidden. On purpose. The next day, I woke early and dug through the plastic bins I'd stored in Jenna's garage since moving in. Boxes full of old birthday cards, stuffed animals, and notebooks that smelled like dust and childhood. Somewhere at the bottom, beneath a tangle of ribbons and folded t-shirts, I found it. An old hardcover book of American folktales. I remember Dad used to read it to me on nights when the thunder rattled the windows. It made the monsters outside feel small. I flipped through the pages, and just like I thought, a faded postcard was tucked between chapter 4 and 5. It was bent at the corners, slightly yellowed, but the handwriting on the back was unmistakable. Marielle. You're the youngest, but you carry the heaviest truths. One day, they'll need to hear you, but for now, protect your voice. I'm proud of who you are, even if I don't get to see who you become. Love, Dad. That postcard became my anchor. I carried it in my back pocket for days, touching it whenever my faith wavered. When someone doubted me. When Ramona's words played on a loop in my mind. That tiny piece of paper whispered back, steady and sure, You are not wrong. I started noticing things I'd brushed off before. The way Vernon used to pause when I entered a room, the quick shifts in his expression, the way my mother's voice dropped whenever someone brought up finances. The tension wasn't new, it had always been there. I just hadn't known what to call it. My dad hadn't been trying to protect me from heartbreak. He'd been trying to protect my future. From being stolen. From being rewritten. That afternoon, I sat at the dining table with the draft email on one side and the postcard on the other. The house was quiet, Jenna was out for work, the neighbors' dogs weren't barking, and even the wind seemed to still itself. For once, I had silence. And in that silence, I found clarity. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't making things up. I wasn't unstable. I was being erased. And not just emotionally, legally, financially, my name, my inheritance, my story, taken and twisted until I looked like the villain in my own life. Well, not anymore. That evening, I wrote Lionel a letter. I didn't call, didn't text. I wanted something concrete, something he could hold in his hand, just like the proof he'd been holding for me all this time. I wrote, Lionel, I know it's been a long time. I know you may not have heard from me since Dad's funeral, but I've found something, and I think it's time I saw what he left behind. If you still have what he asked you to keep, please, I'm ready to see it, Marielle. I signed it, folded it, and walked it to the mailbox 2 blocks over. Dropped it in. Didn't look back. That night, I dreamed of Dad. He was standing in the front doorway of our old house, same flannel shirt he used to wear when raking leaves. His hands were full of keys, all of them different, house keys, car keys, ones I didn't recognize. You already know which one fits, he said, his voice calm. I don't know if I'm ready, I told him. He smiled. That's the thing about truth, kiddo. You never feel ready for it. You just step forward anyway. I woke up before I could take a step, but in the dim morning light, I got dressed, tied my shoes, and stepped forward anyway. The morning after I mailed the letter to Lionel, I woke up feeling like I had run 10 miles in my sleep. My arms ached, my back was stiff, and something heavy sat behind my ribs. Not quite dread, more like the knowledge that something was shifting, and that I'd have to decide whether to face it or pretend not to see it. I checked my phone like I always did, mostly out of habit. No calls, no messages, but when I opened social media, it was right there at the top of the feed, Callista's birthday. There she was in a long emerald dress, standing next to Vernon and Ramona, all of them beaming beneath a balloon arch at some rustic ranch venue. Celebrating our Stargirl's 33rd, the caption read. Family first, always. Family first. I stared at the screen for longer than I'd like to admit, trying to convince myself it didn't sting the way it did. I wasn't invited, not even a text, not even a lie pretending they meant to include me, but forgot. They didn't forget. They made a choice. I scrolled through the photos. There were group shots, dancing videos, a dozen different angles of the cake, which, by the way, had all of our family names scrawled in cursive frosting around the border. All of them, except mine. At first, I thought maybe I missed it. Maybe it was on another side, or cropped out. But I zoomed in, checked again. Nope, my name wasn't there. I didn't cry. Maybe because I'd already shed all those tears in other chapters of my life. Maybe because there was something harder forming inside me now. Anger without the shouting. A kind of quiet rage that sharpened me. And then, as I scrolled through the tagged photos, I found it. A group shot taken by someone else, not staged. Everyone smiling, arms around each other. Ramona, Vernon, Callista, a few cousins. There in the corner, near where I would have stood, was a young woman I didn't recognize. I tapped on her profile. Cassandra Morales. A cousin I'd met once at a funeral years ago. Barely spoke to her. But under the photo, the tag read, Cassandra Morales, our baby girl, the heart of the family. My name had been replaced. Not just ignored, replaced. Ramona even commented, couldn't be more proud of this girl. I stared at that sentence so long it started to blur. When I finally put the phone down, the room was too quiet. I needed noise, movement, something to distract me from the hollow burning in my chest. I grabbed my hoodie and walked out the door. There was only one place that made sense to go. I walked the 15 blocks to our old house, the one where I grew up, the one my dad helped build a porch on with his own hands, the one where I lost my voice before I even knew I had one. No one was home, or if they were, they didn't open the door. I didn't knock. I just walked around back to the yard. The swing was gone. The tree Dad had planted for me when I was 5, the one that bloomed yellow flowers in the spring and dropped confetti leaves in October, had been chopped down. The stump was still there, jagged and raw, like it had been cut in a rush. I stood in its place, remembering the afternoon he built that swing. The way Callista rolled her eyes and said, "Why does she get a tree?" And how Dad replied without hesitation, "Because she listens." I'd sit there for hours as a kid, telling the wind everything I didn't know how to say out loud. Now it was just grass and dirt. And silence. It didn't matter how many emails I found, how many postcards he left behind. My father's presence had been scrubbed from this place. Like mine. Like we were both just phases the family had grown out of. Later that week, I ran into Callista at the farmer's market downtown. She was dressed to impress, as usual. Heels that clicked too loud for pavement, and sunglasses too big for a cloudy day. I hadn't planned on saying anything. Honestly, I'd intended to keep walking, but she saw me first. "Marielle," she said flatly. I nodded. "Callista." We stood like that for a beat too long. "How have you been?" she asked, voice polite, distant, the tone people use when they don't want a real answer. "Fine," I replied. "You looked happy at your party." Her lips twitched. "It was nice. Family's everything, you know." "Yeah," I said. "So I heard." She exhaled through her nose, shifting her weight. "Look, I don't want this to get weird. Mom's been through a lot." "Has she?" I asked, tilting my head. "Because so have I. You just never bothered to ask." Callista pursed her lips. "Please don't make this harder on her." I let out a short laugh, bitter as black coffee. "Me? I'm the problem?" "You were always too much," she said. "Too intense. Too sensitive. Always needing something." I blinked. "Needing something like honesty? A sense of safety?" She looked away. "I have to go." And just like that, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving me holding a basket of vegetables and a dozen things I wanted to say but didn't. That night, I sat on the edge of Jenna's guest bed, scrolling through my emails again, looking for distraction. That's when I saw it. A text from an unknown number. "He's meeting with a real estate agent tomorrow. It's about the house." I stared at the message. No name, no punctuation. But I knew who it was from. Lionel. My hands tightened around the phone. I stood, the floor cool against my bare feet. This wasn't just about being left off a cake. It wasn't about birthday parties or swing sets. They weren't just trying to forget me. They were trying to erase me, legally, financially, permanently. And if that was their plan, they were about to find out that I wasn't going anywhere. The next morning, I was already sitting outside the legal clinic by 8:15 a.m., coffee in hand, the file folder with my name on it pressed tightly to my chest. Amarillo's air was dry, hot even in the morning, and I could feel the back of my neck damp under my hoodie. Inside, the receptionist gave me a clipboard and a tight smile, the kind that said, "We're doing what we can with what we've got." I filled out the form slowly, answering every line as if it were a court declaration, not just intake. The volunteer legal assistant who met with me couldn't have been more than 25. She introduced herself as Jasmine, and she listened with brows furrowed as I laid it all out. I told her about the arm, about Vernon's threats, about the strange folder with the wrong spelling of my name, and finally, about the scholarship fund. "I think it's been tampered with," I said quietly. "Or stolen." She nodded, pulled her laptop around, and tapped a few keys. "Do you know which institution it was managed through?" I gave her the name of the credit union and sat back as she searched. Her eyes narrowed a few seconds later. "There's a scholarship fund listed, but it's not under your name anymore. It's under Vernon's." My stomach twisted. She clicked again. 4 years ago, a notarized amendment was filed. It appears the fund was reclassified as a family operating reserve. The new beneficiary listed was himself. Was there authorization from me? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, she said. But there's a signature, and it looks scanned in. Not hand-signed. There's also no verification trail. I stared at her screen like it was a brick wall. One more place where my name had been removed, edited out like an ink blot someone wanted to pretend never existed. Do you think it's forgery? She looked at me gently. If it was signed without your consent, it's not just forgery, it's fraud. That word stuck in my mind as I left the building. Fraud. Not a misunderstanding, not a family dispute. A crime. That afternoon, I didn't go back to Jenna's. I drove to Callista's apartment complex on the other side of town. She lived in one of those new buildings with rooftop grills and dog washing stations, perfect for someone who wanted to look like they had it all figured out. I didn't text ahead. I buzzed her unit. She answered with a slight pause in her voice. Marielle? What's up? I need to talk. In person. Another pause. Then the door clicked. She met me at the elevator, arms crossed over her blouse like a shield. Is this about Mom? No, I said. It's about you. We stood in her kitchen, her pouring water into two mismatched mugs. I didn't sit. You knew, I said. She didn't ask what I meant. I didn't know everything. You knew enough. The fun Dad set up for me? Gone. Vernon refiled the paperwork. He claimed it for himself. She sighed, set the mug down too hard. Look, you always make things bigger than they are. I laughed once. Bigger than having my inheritance stolen? God, Marielle, she snapped. You were never the main character in this family. I'm sorry, but that's how it was. Something sharp and cold slid into my chest. I stepped back, almost afraid if I stayed too close, I'd let her words sink too deep. I thought you didn't speak up because you were scared, I said. Now I think you just didn't care. She didn't reply. I turned and left. Back at Jenna's, I sat at her small kitchen table and drafted the kind of email I never imagined myself writing. 1 part legal warning, 1 part final line in the sand. To Ramona, Vernon. Subject, notice regarding identity documents. This is formal notice that any further use of my legal name, personal identification, or signature, real or falsified, without my direct consent, will result in immediate legal action. You are not authorized to speak on my behalf, modify records in my name, or make claims using any part of my personal or educational history. This includes, but is not limited to, use of my name in financial or real estate documents, educational funding, or estate transfer filings. Let this serve as your final warning. Marielle Elias Whitman. I hit send and stared at the screen. A minute later, a reply pinged back from Vernon's account. Don't test me, little girl. I read it twice, and then deleted it. But the silence that followed from Ramona, that hurt worse. No reply, no apology, no, this isn't what I meant. Just silence. The next day, I started building my case, literally. I pulled out a folder and labeled it, What They Took From Me. Inside, I added the printout from the scholarship account, the email Vernon had sent years ago claiming I was unstable, a copy of my original nursing school acceptance letter, and the screenshots of the posts that smeared my name. I even started reaching out to people who might remember the swing Dad built in the backyard, or the last Thanksgiving where he handed me the envelope with my name on it. Piece by piece, I started building not just a case, but a story. One that had evidence, one that couldn't be rewritten. That evening, as I closed my laptop and slid the file into my backpack, my phone buzzed. A message from Lionel. I'm ready to show you what your father left in my care. I stared at the text for a long time before replying. I'm ready too, but I'm not the girl who left crying. And I wasn't. I was walking into the fire with documents, not emotions. I wasn't knocking on their door anymore. I was opening mine. I showed up at Lionel's office just before noon. The place was tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax prep shop on 9th Street. No sign on the door, just a faded placard that said, Private Practice. Inside, it smelled like old carpet and lemon-scented wipes, and there were 2 chairs in the waiting room, both unoccupied. He waved me in without standing up. I figured you'd come soon, he said, sliding a manila envelope across the desk toward me. "He told me you would." He meant my father. I didn't sit right away. I stared at the envelope. It wasn't large. It didn't glow. There was no dramatic seal or heavy stamp on it, just a name scribbled in pen. "Marili, when you're ready." I sat. Slowly. My fingers hovered for a second before I reached for it. "There's also a USB inside," Lionel said. "Oh, and a notarized copy of the original will, plus a few things I've never looked at." Elias made me promise. When I finally opened the flap, the first thing I saw was a folded letter and a flash drive tucked into a small plastic sleeve. I opened the letter first. My father's handwriting, curved, exact, unmistakable. "Baby girl, if this letter's in your hands, then I'm not around to walk you through what's coming. That breaks me, but I want you to remember this. People will try to shrink you. They'll twist your words, shift your story, and smile while they do it. That's what power does when it's in the wrong hands. This file has everything I set aside for you, my wishes, my warnings, and the proof that what's yours should stay yours. Trust yourself more than you trust their explanations. And when the time comes, don't whisper. Speak, even if your voice shakes. I love you forever, Dad." I must have sat there in silence for 10 minutes before I looked up again. Lionel was patient. There's more. The next hour was a blur of details I barely understood. The original will, which listed me as the sole recipient of my father's scholarship trust and half ownership of the house. Audio files where he recorded explanations, one dated just a week before his last hospital stay. Documents showing Vernon had no legal authority to amend anything without my knowledge. And still, he had everything Vernon had claimed, every time he told others I was just dramatic or unstable, had been built on a lie, a carefully constructed one. And now I had it all, in writing, in voice, in signatures. After I left Lionel's office, I drove straight to the credit union. It was a short, quiet ride. My hands clenched on the wheel, thoughts racing faster than the car. I parked, walked in, and requested a credit report. That's when I learned about the loan. $30,000, filed 3 years ago under my full name, using my social security number, and tied to the bakery's business license. I was listed as a silent investor. The employee assisting me, a young man with a polite tone and tired eyes, clicked through the records while I stood frozen on the inside. "Is there a chance," I asked carefully, "that this was filed without my consent?" He looked at me with caution. "It would require signature verification. If you didn't sign, that's identity misuse." "Not just misuse," I said, my voice tightening. "It's theft." He printed the documents for me and offered a quiet, "Good luck," before I left. I didn't go home after that. I went to Jess's. Jess was my best friend from childhood, the kind who knew my favorite sandwich and my worst memory. When I knocked, she opened the door wearing sweatpants and a messy bun, the smell of cinnamon rolls trailing out behind her. "Jess," I said, holding out the paperwork. She didn't even ask what it was. She stepped aside to let me in. I told her everything. She sat there quietly while I talked. About Vernon, the forged loan, the real will. About Ramona's silence and Callista's cruelty. About Lionel's envelope and my father's voice echoing from a flash drive. "I asked about you at the bakery," she said finally. "That week you vanished. I asked Vernon if you were okay." "And?" I asked. "He told me you had episodes, that you were being watched for psychiatric treatment, said you'd been violent. When I pushed back, he told me not to come back to the shop, said I was enabling." I swallowed the burn in my throat. "They fired you." She nodded. "They didn't call it that. They just erased me from the schedule." "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. I should have done more. I should have screamed louder." "You were the only one who said anything," I whispered. Jess reached over and squeezed my hand. "So what are you gonna do now?" I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it across her table. "I'm filing." The next morning, I met with a pro bono attorney named Nancy in a modest office near the courthouse. She wore sensible shoes and had eyes that looked like they'd seen every kind of human betrayal. She didn't flinch at my story, just nodded, asked precise questions, and took diligent notes. By the end of the meeting, we had 3 complaints ready to go: fraud, identity theft, emotional abuse. Nancy asked if I wanted her to keep things quiet, work under the radar until the case developed. No, I said. I want them to see it coming. That evening, I walked home, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Conviction. I wasn't hoping to be rescued. I wasn't holding out for Ramona to come around or Callista to remember I existed. I was building the wall myself. I arrived back at Jenna's a little after 8. The porch light was on, the air still thick with Texas heat. I unlocked the door and kicked off my shoes, set my bag down, walked to the kitchen for a glass of water. And then I heard it. The sharp pop of glass breaking. I froze, rushed to the front room. There on the floor lay a shattered brick, pieces scattered across the hardwood. Next to it, a piece of paper folded and taped to the side. I picked it up carefully, blood running from where my palm grazed the shards. The note read, "You think you're smarter than us? Keep pushing." I stood there for a long moment, blood dripping slowly onto the floor, heart steady. Not racing, just aware. He thought he could scare me, but I wasn't scared. I was already armed with everything he feared: paper, power, proof. The brick incident had left a mess of glass and a deeper crack I didn't show on my face. I wrapped my hand, cleaned up the pieces, and placed the note in a Ziploc bag as evidence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I turned off the porch light and went to bed with one thought playing over and over in my head. Let him come. I've got everything he fears, on record. The next morning, I met Lionel outside his office, still dressed in the same plain white shirt and old brown loafers he always wore. He looked like a man who'd kept secrets too long, not because he wanted to, but because he'd been asked to by someone he couldn't say no to. "I've got something to show you," he said, unlocking the back door of the office and motioning me in. He led me to a side room I hadn't seen before, just a desk, a metal cabinet, and an old desktop monitor that whirred when it turned on. "This," he said, sliding a USB into the port, "is from the security cam I installed years ago when I was helping Elias with the bakery's lease paperwork. You remember the back alley, right?" I nodded slowly, already knowing what I was about to see. Lionel double-clicked the file. The screen flickered, then displayed grainy footage from the alley behind the bakery, trash cans, faded signage. Then 2 figures came into view, one shorter, one taller. Me, him, no faces, but the audio was crystal clear. "You're hurting me," my voice whispered. "Stay quiet," Vernon snapped back, "or it'll be worse next time." The words hung in the small room like thick fog. I didn't breathe for at least a full minute. I watched myself flinch in the frame, watched Vernon's hand grab my arm, watched the shove that pushed me just out of view. I turned to Lionel. "This is it," I said. "This is what we lead with." He didn't argue. That afternoon, I drove back to the only place I once called home. I hadn't been on that porch since the day Ramona told me to leave. I held a folder in one arm, the other hand trembling just slightly as I rang the bell. No one answered. I knocked again. Still nothing. Then I stepped back and looked up at the window above the porch. A curtain shifted. She saw me, and then she walked away. I stood there another minute, just long enough to let the moment scar. Then I turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. Back at Jenna's, I sat in the guest room with my laptop open and the video file loaded. I stared at the thumbnail for a long time. My finger hovered over the trackpad. Then I clicked upload. Caption. They said I was unstable. Watch this and decide for yourself. It was shared to every platform I had: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, no filter, no fancy editing, just the truth. And the truth doesn't need polishing. By morning, the view count had already passed 30,000. By noon, I had more messages than I could read. Some from strangers saying they believed me. Some from people claiming I was trying to ruin a good man's reputation. And then, some from names I recognized, old classmates, former coworkers. A few even from other women who had once worked for Vernon. One message stood out. It read, "I worked the register at the bakery back in 2016. He skimmed from the cash drawer almost every other night. Told me it was adjusting for inventory errors. I didn't say anything. I was scared. But if you're standing, so will I. Her name was Lydia. I remembered her. She used to sneak me extra muffins when Vernon wasn't looking. We arranged a call that evening. She was nervous, voice low, but steady. I watched him pocket cash, fudge numbers, change hours on the clock-in sheets. He made you the scapegoat back then, too. Said you were the one messing up the reports. I closed my eyes. He made me sign statements, I said, and I didn't even know what I was signing. I believe that, she replied. I'm willing to write a statement now. Swear it under oath if I have to. I thanked her. Hung up. Filed her email into my folder. I wasn't alone anymore. The video continued to spread. It made local news. A reporter called me, asked for a statement. I declined to speak. Let the video speak instead. The bakery shut down for a day, then reopened with Vernon behind the counter like nothing happened. But the customers were fewer. The smiles were thinner. The whispers were louder. Then the final call came. From Nancy, my lawyer. He just tried to put the house on the market, she said, voice clipped. Today, filed the documents through an online realtor service. Illegally. My hand tightened around the phone. Is that so? Yes. But he didn't count on one thing. I waited. You have the original will, she said. We've already filed for an injunction. You have a court date next week. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. For the first time in my life, someone else was saying the words for me. My name was back on the record, and this time, Vernon was the one whose version of the truth was falling apart. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. I didn't try to. I spent hours combing through every document, highlighting my name where it had once been erased and restored. I played my father's recording again at least 3 times, not because I needed convincing, but because I needed to remember that he believed in me, long before anyone else did. The morning was sharp and dry. I wore black slacks, a button-up shirt I'd borrowed from Jenna, and a silver pendant my dad had given me on my 17th birthday. In the mirror, I looked nothing like the girl Vernon used to bark orders at in the bakery. I looked like someone who'd survived something and was about to win. Lionel met me outside the courthouse, briefcase in one hand, steady eyes behind those old glasses of his. You ready? I've been ready, I said, and I was. The courtroom wasn't cold, as I expected. It was still, focused, the kind of stillness that makes you sit straighter, like the walls are holding their breath. Vernon walked in 5 minutes after us, slicked back hair, a pressed blazer that didn't fit quite right around the shoulders. Ramona followed behind, her eyes avoiding mine. Not a word, not a nod, just air. The judge entered, gavel tapped, and the proceedings began. Lionel started with the original will. My client, he said, was designated by her father as the rightful heir to the Whitman estate, including the scholarship trust and property located at 1129 Oakwood Lane. He handed over the document. Thick paper, clear ink, real. Then came the audio. My father's voice echoed through the speakers, steady, tired, but full of clarity. My daughter Marielle is to inherit the house and scholarship account, no exceptions. If I'm gone, it's because I've been sick, not because I stopped loving her. Protect what belongs to her. You could have heard a pin drop in the room. Vernon shifted in his seat. Ramona clenched her purse like it might fly away. The judge raised an eyebrow. This recording was made when? 2 weeks before his passing, Your Honor, Lionel replied. It was witnessed by the notary listed in our evidence file. Next, they called the realtor Vernon had worked with to try to sell the house. He looked uncomfortable. I was shown documents, the man said, but they didn't match public records. When I asked about the discrepancy, Mr. Vernon said the paperwork was in transition. I should have verified more thoroughly. The judge leaned forward. It appears, Mr. Vernon, you've built a house of lies, she said flatly, and you nearly sold it on stolen ground. Vernon tried to speak, some half-mumbled defense, but the court clerk motioned for silence. Then came the part I'd dreaded, the clip. The grainy security footage played on the courtroom monitor. You couldn't see faces, but the voices were unmistakable. You're hurting me, my own voice whispered. Stay quiet, Vernon snapped. Or it'll be worse next time. I didn't look at the screen. I turned instead to Ramona. She didn't meet my eyes. She stared at her lap, her jaw clenched, her body frozen in that way people freeze when they can't deny what they just saw but won't dare speak it. The judge turned to her. Mrs. Whitman, were you aware of this incident? Ramona's lips parted, then shut again. Her head moved slightly side to side. I didn't see that footage before, she whispered. But you knew something had happened, the judge pressed. Ramona said nothing. The judge gave a long exhale and wrote something in her notes. Then came the ruling. Mr. Vernon Whitman, this court finds you guilty of fraud, identity theft, and attempted illegal property transfer. You are hereby ordered to pay restitution and are remanded into custody pending sentencing. Gasps whispered through the room. Vernon stood, attempted to speak again, but two officers approached, cuffed him, and led him away. Ramona didn't follow him. She didn't stand. She didn't move. As Vernon passed me, our eyes met. He didn't smirk this time. He didn't sneer. He just looked small. Reporters outside waited, cameras in hand, mics extended. Someone asked, "Do you have a statement?" I looked at them calmly. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here to reclaim what's mine." That was all. The applause inside wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be. Just a few soft claps, mostly from strangers, a quiet acknowledgement that something unjust had finally been made right. Outside, I walked down the courthouse steps with Lionel by my side. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. We stopped at the sidewalk where Ramona stood, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her heels wobbled slightly on the concrete. "I thought you'd destroy us," she said. I looked at her evenly. "I didn't have to. You did it for me." She started to cry then. Not dramatically. Just quietly, like the tears surprised her. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I kept walking. In my hand was the envelope the judge had returned to me. The official ruling, the deed, the scholarship account paperwork. And keys. My father's keys. I held them tight as I walked toward the bus stop. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the name on the papers. Mine. And it was finally written in ink no one could erase. C. The courthouse door had barely closed behind me when the silence hit. A silence not like the one in that courtroom, full of anticipation and judgment, but the kind that wraps around your ankles like water. Still, deep, uncertain. I stood on the steps longer than I should have, holding those keys in my hand, the final echo of the judge's ruling still bouncing in my ears. I had the house. I had the name back. I even had the truth, now signed, sealed, and stamped. But what I didn't have, what I wasn't sure I'd ever get, was peace. A week later, I walked into the house on Oakwood Lane. Not for a visit, not to collect mail or clean out closets. I walked in because it was mine. It smelled different, older, somehow, like it had been holding its breath while waiting for someone to come home. The swing Dad built in the backyard was gone, of course. Vernon had taken care of that early on, but the patch of grass where it once stood looked untouched, almost sacred. I walked room to room slowly, touching the light switches, opening the windows. Even the creaks in the floor sounded like old memories trying to speak again. I paused in the hallway, my fingers tracing the indentations on the wall where pictures had once hung. Some nail holes were still there. Empty. Then I reached for the doorknob to my childhood bedroom. It turned without resistance. No longer locked. That alone nearly undid me. Inside, it looked like someone had half tried to redecorate and then given up. The walls were painted a dull beige, but the outline of where my old bookshelf used to sit was still faintly visible. I left my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed frame. No mattress, just wood slats and dust. I stayed there for a while, listening, letting the quiet tell me what it had held in while I was gone. That evening, as the sun began to drop, I found an envelope waiting for me in the mailbox. No return address. The handwriting, though, was hers. Ramona. I brought it inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it without ceremony. "Mariely," it began. I don't know where to start. I don't expect this to fix anything. I just want to tell you I was scared. I was wrong. I see that now. I don't know why I let him come between us. I wish I could take it all back. I hope that one day you'll find it in your heart to forgive me, or at least understand that I didn't hate you. I just didn't know how to protect you. There was no signature, just the final line. I'm sorry. I didn't crumple it, didn't burn it or throw it away. I folded it neatly and tucked it into the top drawer beside the sink, but I didn't write back. Some wounds don't bleed, they calcify. They wrap around your memory like vines, squeezing certain things out and letting others cling tighter. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else to ease their conscience. It's something you give yourself when you're ready to stop carrying the weight. And I wasn't ready, not yet. A few weeks passed. The town moved on like it always does. Some people smiled at me now with new eyes, like they'd always believed me, even when they didn't. Others avoided me in the grocery store, pretending not to notice. The bakery reopened under new ownership. The name changed. The window decals were fresh. But when I walked by, I could still feel the echo of who I used to be on the tiles inside. Jess opened her cafe not far from downtown. She called it Second Chances. I went every Sunday. I sat by the window, sipped coffee, and listened to the laughter of people who didn't know what had happened but somehow brought healing with them anyway. In time, the noise faded. Not gone, but farther away. One afternoon, I climbed up to the attic. The heat was thick, the dust heavy, but I felt drawn there. In the far corner, beneath a tarp, I found an old wooden chest. Inside were blankets, photo albums, a few VHS tapes from the 90s, and a folder. It was labeled, in my dad's handwriting, "To Marielle, when she's ready." My breath caught as I opened it. Inside were a few more documents, copies of letters he had sent to the scholarship board, journal entries from his final months, a drawing I had made as a kid that he'd dated and laminated, and a letter. This one wasn't typed. It was written with the kind of pen that bled slightly into the paper. Marielle, I always knew you were the one who would outlast them all. Not because you were the loudest or the strongest, but because you see what others don't. You feel what others won't. That's not weakness. It's your superpower. The world may try to write you out, but I wrote you in. Forever. Love, Dad. I sat with that letter for a long time. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower buzzed. A bird chirped at the window. Life went on, and so did I. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, the same spot where Dad used to drink his coffee, where Vernon once barked orders, where Ramona had stood, arms crossed, daring me to leave. Now it was mine. I watched the sun graze the fence line and whispered to no one in particular, "You don't need everyone to believe you. You just need to stop disbelieving yourself." Healing didn't look like a celebration. It wasn't fireworks or champagne or grand reunions. It was sitting in a quiet house that used to hold my silence and knowing that I finally had a voice. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who were supposed to love us the most. But healing isn't about vengeance. It's about reclaiming your truth, even when no one else stands beside you. Have you ever had to choose peace over apology? Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters here. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales of quiet strength, justice, and redemption.